Welcome everyone to our first session on the community of practice for collective impact and the sustainable development goals. It's a very exciting initiative. We've been talking with our partners at the Tamarack Institute for the better part of a year in organizing and planning the curriculum around it. What better time to talk about collective impact and how we can work together than the time of that we find ourselves in this world these days. We're hoping that everyone can come learn some of the latest and greatest skills about how we can work together practically in community and apply that to their work. So I'm John Beal. I'm the program director for the Local Futures Project. We are based at Conrad Grebel University College at the University of Waterloo campus. We are funded in part by the Sustainable Development Goals funding program from the Government of Canada. And we are very pleased to partner with our partners at Tamarack Institute. I also mention my colleague Laura Carpries, who is we work together on Local Futures. So maybe with that, we will go start with our land acknowledgement. We can go to the next slide. So I would like to acknowledge the Conrad Grebel University College and the University of Waterloo campus are built on the Haldeman Tract, the land granted in 1784 to the Six Nations that includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River, from its source in Dundalk to its mouth at Lake Erie. This is the traditional territory of the Chinantan, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. And these lands have been home to indigenous nations since time immemorial and remain a place of enduring connection, stewardship, and sovereignty. And our work together on reconciliation with indigenous people includes decolonizing our historical narratives, our minds, our hearts, and committing to meaningful action in support of truth and reconciliation. Now, this is an ongoing process, and we have a long way to go. And so we acknowledge this in humility and gratitude to our Indigenous neighbors, past and present. And go to the next slide, please. So we want to just kind of right off the top, talk a little bit about what we are hoping to achieve today. It's really meant to be an opportunity to meet others. There are 34 others on the call. There's about 80. It's changing. There's a few more coming, but 80 to 100 who have kind of expressed interest to join and be part of this community. So there's a lot of amazing change makers from across the country that are interested, and we want everyone to benefit from networking and learning from each other's experience and sharing your own. We want to talk about what is a community of practice, what we hope to achieve from that. We want to create an understanding of collective impact. What's the framework of this? What are some of the tools, some of the principles around it? And we want to talk about how this can apply to advance local work on the SDGs, on issues that are important to each of you in your communities. So that's what we're hoping to do today. There'll be a mix of presentations, interactiveness, breakout rooms. And now I'll just talk a little bit about the learning community at large. And so what we're really hoping to achieve here is how do we build the skills towards collective impact? Working together is not a given. It's not an easy task. You have to be intentional. Canada faces many challenges and many common challenges. And so it's about sharing our stories. It's about bringing our perspective and the right tools to the table and creating opportunities to actually engage with each other. So that's what we're looking to do. We want to build relationships and shared learning. We want to create a network around collective impact. And we want to understand kind of where the opportunities are locally for impact to be felt and for partnerships to be developed. Just as a note, and many of you probably have heard this already, but this community is open to all Canadians, and so residents, organizations, municipal leaders, whatever it is. So if you know of others that might be interested, don't hesitate to share it out, and we're happy to have people join throughout the 10-month curriculum that we have set up. And so that brings me to the last point here. We are looking at a 10-month community of practice. So we'll run until next winter in February. It's free to participate. It'll be online monthly, and we'll have some resources to make sure that the recordings and resources that are shared during the call are available during the in between times of the meetings. A brief note, I talked a little bit about it already, but who's here today and who's kind of registered for this community? And so we have 80 to 100 people now. That number's changed a little bit since this slide was made. We're covering 8 provinces, many from Ontario, but it's nice to see a diversity of perspectives coming into this community. And we ask people, can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges you're working to address in your community? And a pretty varied list here around climate and affordability, looking at government structures, food security, mental health, quite a range here. So I think that it'll be a really fascinating discussion. We want, bring your perspective, bring your work to bear in these conversations, and we want to kind of the beauty of it is how does it all mix together, and we find those commonalities and those kind of how do we apply the tools that we're learning to advance these causes. And then briefly, this is kind of, the layout, the plan. We're launching today in April on the left. Next month, we'll host a session on creating a common agenda, talking about systems change and systems barriers. And then we'll share this. This all be shared, so don't feel like you have to take it all in right now. But in June, we'll talk about engaging diverse perspectives, especially important in these days. We'll have a couple sessions throughout the year where we want to have people sharing their ideas and perspectives directly, and that would be more of a lead in terms of what's being offered. So, more breakout rooms, more structured conversation around how do we, as a community, contribute our ideas towards challenges that someone's bringing to the table. Um, we'll talk about how do we shift systems. We'll take a little break in August for the summer, and then back in September, talking about how do we shift systems, how do we engage in collaborative leadership, and we'll talk about data. We'll take a break in December, and then we'll focus on some peer input discussions, and then reflections on the community. And this is a draft, so we'd love to hear from you throughout. If there are topics that you feel would be really interesting to cover, we want to hear from you, and we're always happy uh, to thread them in to tweak things as we go. So I'll go to the next slide. And just to talk briefly about myself and Laura and the work we're doing at Local Futures, we're hosting this community in partnership with our great partners at the Tamarack Institute. Our goal is around how do we use the Sustainable Development Goals to advance community prosperity and sustainability into the future. These are goals. Laura will talk a little bit about it as a brief backgrounder, but these are goals that have been set in an international space at the UN, but have not found a home in community. And so we're trying to figure out how do we localize these goals, bringing different stakeholders together, like universities, municipalities, community organizations, to work together. And so this was kind of an element of this project that we wanted to convene this community. And then I think last slide from me before I pass it to Laura, but this is where we're working, and we've been traveling. I know some of you are from these communities, and we would have met through these engagement activities. So it's great to see you here. But we've been traveling across the country. We're working in 5 locations, talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, and our end goal is to create what's known as a voluntary local review in each of these locations with the cities. This basically a progress report on the Sustainable Development Goals to understand how have we been doing, where are we going, where are we strong, where do we have gaps, and all in the with the intention of advancing more prosperous, sustainable communities. With that, I think that's my last slide, so I think I will pass it over to my colleague Laura to just give a brief background before we go further into the today's activities.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. So just to give a little bit of an overview about the Sustainable Development Goals. So as John mentioned, the Sustainable Development Goals were a framework that were developed at the United Nations and began with world leaders asking this question of what is your vision for a better world? What do you hope for the future, and how can we collaborate to make this world a better place? And through the negotiation process, they resulted in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are this list of 17 goals that range from ending poverty, protecting to the planet, and ensuring that all people enjoy peace and prosperity. So they're one of the key aspects of the SDGs is that they broaden this definition of sustainability from thinking primarily of environmental sustainability to thinking of environmental, economic, and the social dimensions of sustainability altogether. And they're this roadmap for the world that we want to build to guide all countries and all people together towards this common agenda for change. And the SDGs are unique in that they take a whole of society approach. Well, it was governments who signed on, member states of the UN who signed on, they really apply to all countries, all people, community organizations to get on board with this big agenda. So some key principles that are in these goals is that they apply to every country equally. All member states are working towards this shared agenda. Another core idea is that achievement of one goal is deeply linked to the achievement of another. So there's deep interconnections between these goals. Like, for example, making progress around the goal of quality education will have impacts in other goal areas, like no poverty, like economic advancement, like gender equity. So these, well, they're presented as 17 individual goals. The framework really says these things are all deeply interconnected. And finally, a core principle of the SDGs is no one left behind, that to make change, all people need to be included, and any solution needs to account for those who have been most marginalized and really an inclusive approach. So this community of practice is framed around the Sustainable Development Goals and collective impact, but maybe diving in a little bit in terms of how they have or haven't found their home. John and I have had conversations with some cities and communities around the world over the past years about how people have been using the SDGs and how they've been seen as valuable. One of the ways is around creating coherence in planning and kind of building this common language. So whether that's within a government providing a single framework that multiple strategies and plans can all feed into, or seeing how different initiatives within a city or a community across various sectors are all contributing to this shared agenda. A second key point in how they add value is around planning using systems thinking to address the complexity that's in these issues. So one example of how one city did this is the city of Strasbourg in France. As they were kind of developing a food strategy, they used the SDGs to think not only about access to food, but to bring in these bigger questions of access to food, but also agricultural systems and equity. And how do these bigger food systems and food waste all interconnect in developing this holistic strategy? The third key aspect of value that we see with the SDGs is how they support partnerships and collaboration. So as we mentioned, they really take on this whole of society approach and can bring people together under this common agenda. So again, through those conversations, the city of Bristol in the UK developed an SDG alliance that brings together municipal partners, university partners, community partners to think of and work on collaborative initiatives to achieve these SDGs. And that's looked like community projects, it's looked like advocacy strategies, and it's looked like policies, but that are bringing together this whole of society approach in developing solutions and strategies. So we really see the SDGs as a collective impact framework. These issues, as I said, are deeply interconnected to one another, and they embody a whole of society approach. It's only through collaboration that the SDGs can be achieved. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to Sylvia Chu, who is the Consulting Director of Collaboration at the Tamarack Institute and will be our facilitator. So Sylvia is passionate about community change and what becomes possible when residents and various sector leaders share a vision for their future. Sylvia brings more than 25 years of experience in supporting nonprofit organizations and collaborations to achieve their vision, mission, and strategic priorities. And we are so grateful that she's been working with us to shape this community of practice and brings her expertise in facilitation to us today. So I'll pass it over to you, Sylvia. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Laura. I am just going to see if I can share my screen. Is that what I think that's what I'm supposed to be trying to do? Hold on, bear with me one second. See, so I can, does that, it's not showing up there. Oh, just a sec. It's not showing up, I don't think, even though, no, let's just see. Nope, I'm not seeing it. Oh, wait a minute. Nope. I think I'm going to have to rely on you if that's okay, Laura, to keep sharing. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It is lovely to see so many familiar faces and new faces as well. And I think for me, the piece that is most exciting is this notion of creating a learning community together with such a diverse network of people, both within the same communities and also across our country. And so for me, part of that is the why. If you want to go to the next slide, Laura. Um, I think a learning community, if this is going to feel very much like we're kind of talking at you, but over time, what we're hoping is to create space for you all to get to know each other as well. Because one of the paradoxes of working collaboratively, which is a necessity when, we want to take a holistic community-wide approach, is that we have to know and we have to trust each other and really sort of see the opportunities within our own local to both work together and align our work. And that, in order to do that, we need to know each other. And so it's not going to be like a prescribed piece. We'll always give some content, but then lots of space for you all to kind of understand and interpret how that might impact how you do your own work. If we go to the next slide. Um, so one of the things I love, and this is a visual that comes from the work of the Berkana Institute, Meg Wheatley and colleagues. The blue arrow is sort of like the common system that we're working within, and we know it needs to evolve. We know it needs to change, and it's really beautiful that as a group, we hold an opportunity to be part of the emergent system, experimenting, bringing together new ideas. But what has been learned is individual work is absolutely an essential component, but to really accelerate and get our local communities to impact, we have to integrate across these pioneers, right? These innovators, and then see how we can work with more intentional synergy. And we also have to honor our colleagues who may be holding together the current system until some of this newer learning that we might innovate on together is showing promise, and then work together alongside people who are real bridge builders to link new ideas back to the emergent system and or the dominant system and help it evolve. If we go to the next slide. The communities actually are a way, a mechanism for us to accelerate what we're learning and put it into action. So sometimes for us collectively, this might look like knowledge weaving. And that's what I'm hoping a lot of our times together will allow us to start to do. Then we can start to collaborate together because it's one thing to see the individual work you're doing, but then when you see how it is part of a larger ecosystem of innovation that's unfolding across the country, we can maybe see new opportunities we couldn't see before. And then ultimately, as we start capturing and sharing our learning as a network more broadly within our own networks and externally, people can follow our lead and start to see how we can better accelerate our progress collectively while we're all advancing our own contributions. All right, on to the next. So I believe that because these issues that we're dealing with are so holistic, interconnected, and complex, working at a scale of a local community is really powerful because it starts to take us away from that theoretical knowledge to concretely, what does this look like on the ground? And or rather than getting overwhelmed by all the things we could do, really focusing on where are there opportunities for us to really focus. And innovation is an essential part of what's needed. And working with the unique context of the place is essential as well. So we want to make sure that the how we do the work also matters. So are we engaging um, perspectives that historically, because of inequities, may not have been heard and yet have vital insights into what's needed? How do we really take an opportunity to leverage the work and the learning and the insights of a whole group of people, not just our small team? And how do we challenge ourselves and each other to shift? Because we're part of the system too. We've got our own biases, and we can easily fall back into old ways of doing things. So we can kind of hold each other accountable. If we go to the next slide. So it's really going to be a focus on learning. Do we have all the answers? Absolutely not. We have to figure them out together. And so the context of how we've designed this, we hope, and we're welcoming and needing input from you all along the way, is to evolve an agenda that's really useful and helpful in accelerating our collective learning. So if we go to the next slide. And really, there are four co-components that will enable us to develop a learning community that's strong. We have to work at building relationships, getting to know each other and what each other's doing so that we trust each other. We need folks to share knowledge and learn together. We aren't even, all of us, none of us, though we're all working in this space, may be aware of what each other's doing. So sharing and contributing knowledge is going to be a really important success factor. We want to take some action. Are there things, maybe as you discover new partners, you want to try little experiments together and can coordinate that offline and then bring back and help deepen and create new knowledge around what's possible and how we move this really essential agenda forward. Okay, on to the next. So here's what I would like to do. I would like to start now by giving us some time to get to know each other. I'd like to put us into some small groups of maybe, I think if we can work with maybe 6 small groups, and we're going to give you 20 minutes. And what we'd like each one of you to do individually, first, take one breath. And when you run out of air, you have to be quiet because we have to make sure we've got enough time to hear from everyone. So you want to, who are you and where are you from? Breath two, you can share your insights with one another around either or both of the next questions. So, why is it important to you that you're part of this learning community? Is one possible question. And the second is, what are the questions that are top of mind for you in terms of your work to advance the SDGs? Um, for those of you who are comfortable, we do have a mural, and I don't know how many of you may or may not be familiar with the mural, but I can show it to you right now. Um, and again, this is very interesting. It's not letting me do it. But what we can do is it's a virtual whiteboard. And if there's one person in your group that feels comfortable and wants to share the screen in your room, it just is some virtual stickies that we can capture all our various ideas on. Let me see if it shows up now for me and I might be able to share it with you. Don't feel compelled to use this mural, but certainly if you want to and use it as a record, aha, here we go, and use it as a record, there you can see two things. There's a hand air, icon that lets you move around the screen. You can, if you have a mouse, scroll up and make it bigger. Then you switch to this little point and you can click on and add notes to the individual stickies. There's no order. You can hop around. We have created here 3 things like who are you, where are you from, The next question, why is it important that you're part of the learning community? The final question, any questions that you're currently exploring? And the beauty is, if we can capture that on the mural, or at least one person can from your group, the beauty is we then have a collective record which we can save and share as a PDF. But again, don't feel compelled to do it. Okay, so can we start a timer? It's so at 20 past the hour, we'll bring everybody back. So you've got 20 minutes. You're going to be randomly assigned to a small group, and we look forward to seeing what you come back with. Anybody have any questions before we send you abroad into your little groups? Nope. Thanks, Clara. Helpful to see the nod. All right, off we go. Back, everyone. I know the time probably flew by for many of you. And we're not necessarily going to have time right now to hear from every group, but if you individually or on behalf of your group, either one, have an aha or an insight about everyone you met, what you're thinking now about this community question, the exploration of questions, anything. Anyone want to put your hand up and just share? For those of us who are we didn't join groups and so we're really curious. Yeah, Clara, over to you.
Yeah, so I really like the fact that in my group, we were all coming with our local perspective. So I didn't think about that because we're talking about the SDGs, but people are speaking about councils, people are speaking about like how it applies to their territory and more locally. So I really liked that aspect.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Something you're excited by? Something you heard? We need to hear from at least one more person. Yeah,
Um,
Luke.
yeah, I one of the questions that was raised in our group regarding how to link uh, what's global scale as SDG with what we do at local level, and I think that was very deep kind of question that we all need to reflect on. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for that. Hey, Luke, are you able
Yes,
to
I
unmute?
think I
Yeah.
am. Uh, a little bit of our talk in our group just sort of it came back to we're all sort of in a position where there's a lot of negativity out there. So if we say something, if we're doing something positive, inevitably we're going to get knocked around by someone negative. And so that was it's not necessarily the nicest thing to say, but that's also part of the reason why I like to be in a group like this because it's going to be filled with the most positive people. But that also can put you in a bubble as well. But just trying to overcome the negativity on almost every level is quite difficult.
That's beautiful. And that the community can help hold that space when it's really hard for you to be doing that.
Right.
Beautiful. Thank you. Ashara, over to you.
Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to share. I just really enjoyed the really super quick little conversations and introductions with my group. But I think it was obviously just incredible to kind of, hear the varying backgrounds that we all have, but how much alignment there sort of was right off the bat on our interests in kind of this balance between storytelling and data and how that, ties into the SDGs, but also, many like really all issues of sort of communication and larger issues in community but yeah, so we just kind of dove a little bit into that of looking at the balance of how does one support the other and that kind of topic. So I really enjoyed that conversation. We were like cut off right at the end, so thank you to my group but yeah, hopefully we can continue to chat more.
Well, that's beautiful. And Amy, thank you for your contribution in the chat as well. With your blessing, I'm going to move us along just so we have a bit more time. We'll have more time also before we wrap to have more of a collective conversation. But right now, what I would like to do is shift gears slightly and bring us toward looking at collective impact. Now, just to set the context, if the SDGs and advancing that work locally is the focus of what we're trying to do, collective impact is a framework that can maybe help us learn how. How do we start to do this? And they kind of hopefully should marry up to each other. But I think we wanted to start with a poll because I'm always curious around people's level of expertise or knowledge, familiarity with using this as a framework. Um, and seeing the varying levels of experience with it is within the community is also really beautiful to see. All right, we're at 70%. Can we get to 90 at least before we share back? Oh, look at this. All right, let's give a couple more seconds just to see where we land. Now I greedily want to get to 100%, but we may not get there. Okay. Do you want to, let me end the poll so you guys can all see it, I think. So can you all see? Not quite a bell curve. Lots of folks just on the learning about it or familiar with the theory, less experience, but good to see some or considerable experience in actually implementing it. So that tells us that within this community, there's a whole variety of knowledge. And hopefully, with the brief presentation I am going to give, you'll get everybody sort of a little bit further on we know we're speaking the same language around what this is. So collective impact is really nothing more than a disciplined form of multi-sector collaboration. And it's actually been around since 2011. And 2018, there was a field-wide evaluation that actually proved that it as a framework is particularly effective in generating high impact change at both the community and at the systems level. And so it's really an effective how. And it is an approach that you don't need, obviously, for every situation, but it is particularly valuable when we are dealing with a complex issue that traditional approaches to problem solving may not be as effective at dealing with, because what we've learned is rarely, if ever, does one silver bullet solution actually have sufficient impact in situations that are more complex. And so what we really almost always need is more like silver buckshot, right? A bunch of interconnected and hopefully aligned solutions that are contributing together. And it's the alignment piece that really helps us drive itself forward. And because ideally the framework of the who is using a collect or kind of gathering around this framework is intentionally multi-sector and intentionally including people with lived and living experience of a particular issue in that community and their wisdom and experience about how it manifests in the community can really be essential in coming up with new solutions. And the creativity emerges because each of us then through our conversations has an opportunity to broaden and have a more sophisticated, nuanced understanding of how this issue is playing out, and then are better able to see opportunities to shift and change those dynamics. We at Tamarack, who are big around collaboration, really have found that if I say I want collaboration and so do you, that doesn't translate always to us having exactly the same mental picture around the degree of collaboration. And so this spectrum is one that helps tease out kind of different levels of collaboration. And where you see the red box here is sort of the space where collective impact lives. it is much more about intentionally coordinating organizations or intentionally agreeing to collaborate to advance action on the same shared goals. And sometimes it leads to integration, but that's actually not a requirement and it's not necessarily an expectation. So, along the continuum, one of these options is not better or worse than the others. But you will see, as you can see from the visual, the level of trust required amongst partners at that far right end of the spectrum is much higher. And our understanding of whose problem it is, that turf piece, is much more evolved to a shared understanding of how that works. There are four preconditions that were written about when the original framework was introduced. These are not often talked about as much as the five conditions of the framework itself, but I would say to you, they're really nice ways to assess the degree of readiness within your community or with amongst your partners around embracing a shared approach to tackling an issue at the community level, the need for influential champions who come from diverse perspectives in the community and are happy to contribute their leadership and credibility to the work is important. It requires an assessment around the public's general understanding about the issue that you are focused on and building up that sense of shared urgency for action. It does require the mobilizing of resources, some of which are financial, but I also want to encourage folks to think broadly in terms of in-kind contributions of knowledge, of data, of connections, of meeting space. Because each partner who contributes something is then buying, not that's not probably not the right word. Their contribution is enabling them to state and share their feeling of ownership for the work you're doing together. And lastly, being mindful. Every community is unique. So we all have different communities have different histories of collaboration, which might, mean that how a project unfolds might look different in one community to another. So you need to be really sensitive to that. What I love about this, whoops, slide, which is a little misaligned at the moment, forgive me, is if you look to the far left, in the past, when there was a big complex issue, typically different sectors would, from their own organizational perspective, build plans for how to address the issue. And because it was just a solo organizational perspective, sometimes unintentionally, these efforts would work against each other or would not necessarily align as powerfully as they could. So that in the energy and excitement of collective impact was this notion that we across different organizations could create a shared management paradigm, that we are not going to tackle this issue with a multitude of individualized strategies. Rather, we're going to take some time to come up with a shared strategy that every organization and group can contribute to. And the five conditions are sort of the core foundation. But about 6 years after collective impact really started to kind of catch on as a global movement, my colleagues Mark Cabage and Liz Weaver took a step back and sort of were saying, what do we see out there? Because we were working with many communities across Canada on a range of complex issues. And I really love what they've added. So I want to kind of really focus on that. And it's this notion of a movement building paradigm. So they started with saying, yes, the five conditions of collective impact are roughly right, but there's some important pieces around how you do it that actually contribute to not just aligning, a small group of powerful sector leaders on a shared plan, but the importance that those shared leaders, when they come together, need to remember is that always, in addition to advancing their shared strategy, these 30, 40 people need to realize that they themselves also need to be continually thinking about how they engage and ripple out and create opportunities for a growing network of people to join the effort. I'm now going to quickly just walk us through those five core conditions that create, these are not a recipe, but they are the foundation pieces that you need to sort of reach some alignment around to create this shared management paradigm, this movement. The first is the common agenda. So yes, it is a shared vision that is aspirational, needs to be greater than what any one group or organization could achieve alone. So it's a result also. So it usually emerges after some pretty robust consultation with diverse groups to try and land on what's the shared it that we're trying to achieve and optimally by when. So we set ourselves an ambitious target. It then also includes, as a collective, what are the priority areas that we are going to focus on together as our contribution to the mix, with a view that if we focus on these 3 or 4 things, that will create an environment from which our individual work is more likely to flourish. And lastly, it's our articulation more broadly that we are kind of putting a stake in the ground. We are committed to doing this. We recognize that in order to do this well, we need an infrastructure that enables us to continue to collaborate, and we're in this for the long haul. So it's that signal from the partners that they're going to work together and how. The second condition is shared measurement. And I love this condition. And I love it because it really helps us to do 2 things. We can use data to really help us zero in on, in the scope of a huge complex issue, what are the areas that if we had to narrow our focus as a starting point, where might we pay attention? What are the priorities that might make sense? So as a concrete example of that, when our colleagues in Hamilton were initially developing their strategy, collective strategy for addressing poverty, they started with wanting to host conversations with groups about how do we address poverty in the community. And one of the startling things was nobody wanted to come. Nobody wanted to give up an afternoon or an evening to really focus on something as discouraging as poverty. It's easier to kind of keep our blinkers on. So what they did was they went back and looked at the data and discovered that 75% of the people currently living in poverty in Hamilton at the time were children. And so with that insight then, based on looking at hard data, they were able to reframe the focus to say, how do we make our community the best place to raise a child? And that was pivotal. All kinds of people wanted to come out and have that conversation. And they knew darn well that by focusing on that, because of the data, they would be really focused on advancing poverty in meaningful ways, number one. And number two, it really helped mobilize other networks that were already focused on child well-being and help them appreciate how the lens of poverty might affect what they were trying to do. So it instantly mobilized the network and made it far greater. And this example I also love comes from the Our Kids Network in Hamilton. That's a really mature, more than a decade old collective impact initiative. And they landed ultimately with All Children Thrive. When they started, they were 0 to 6 only, but over the years they've grown. So their focus is now every 0 to 18-year-old within Halton region. If that was their meta goal, they then took a step back and said, what are the tangible things that we would be seeing in the community that would give us a good sense that we were moving in a good way towards the All Children Thrive? And they came up with what they refer to as the Halton 7, which I love because they're really concrete. They then worked back from there to say, given these 7 things, what are the data points that we have available to us? And what are the programs that are currently existing that are helping to contribute to us achieving the Halton 7? So the big takeaway here for us is your data that you want to be working with has to not be overwhelming, but really targeted towards what your common agenda looks like. This notion, the third notion, is mutually reinforcing activities, right? So it requires us to always be thinking about how do we continue to grow and inform the community and raise their awareness, their understanding, their will, and offering concrete ways in which they can contribute to what we're trying to do, creating at that collaborative table amongst players and others a better sense of what's already happening that might be disconnected. And we can actually accelerate impact by aligning things more intentionally together and and creating synergies. And then we also need to think about we keep inventing programs and being frustrated that the system doesn't change. And not that's not fair. That's not the intention of programs. But there is this recognition that programs alone are rarely enough because there are always barriers, intentional or otherwise, that are actually helping to hold that problem stuck. And so the best place for systems level strategies to be identified and mobilized is a collaborative table. So making sure that there are intentional strategies baked in around that systems level and policy change. And together, those will give us what we're ultimately searching for, which is that big targeted population level progress and outcomes. So does every organization and group have to be part of your collaborative effort? Absolutely not. But there needs to be enough of a critical mass, and they need to be sharing out what they're learning and seeing so individual programs can sort of get behind that work and grow the movement for change. Communication is essential ongoingly. So part of it is drawing attention to the issue, but then regularly sharing how we are now seeing things differently through our work together. The progress that's being made is also really important. And a really great example of this is how this was captured on one page by a group in St. John's that was doing poverty reduction work. So you can see they shared some high-level data from their research about why the case for why a focus on poverty. They shared a little bit about the depth of consultation and research that they did to inform their strategy. They talk about their commitment to work together as a network of leaders to advance progress. And they named 4 priorities with specific targets, one in neighborhoods, one in education, one in employment, and one in health. And then 2 years later, as they've been doing the work, they have now evolved kind of. So they're now seeing neighborhoods as the nexus for how the work gets addressed. And they've kind of narrowed down to these 3 areas. But it makes this thinking and this work accessible, which continues to invite people to join. And the last piece, is the backbone infrastructure. And really, the backbone is like the project manager on a construction site, coordinating the efforts of multiple groups so that they stay focused in an aligned way. So that shared leadership table really looks vision and strategy. They make sure, and they're the most leveraged place to do the shared measurement and continuous communication. They really make sure we've got not just that programmatic lens, but the policy and systems lens, and they mobilize funding and resourcing for the whole, always holding that lens of equity in terms of how priorities get identified. And I love this visual, which comes from an evaluation of the practice of collective impact to show you how these 5 components actually work together to advance that shared approach to tackling a complex issue in community. So the common agenda is that starting point, along with that championship of the backbone. The backbone also is the holder of communications. And then ultimately, as the work unfolds, linked to the common agenda, we begin to identify mutually reinforcing activities and the shared measurement. So does the measurement inform the mutual, it's a both and how does it track and communicate progress and learnings over time? And this is just a quick one. We are going to go more deeply into this. But what we think about is there's a leadership table that's diverse, including a fiscal sponsor. We don't want to create a net new organization with a collective impact. So an existing organization can be our bookkeeper and holder of any resource that we mobilize for collective work. And together with a small core staff, they are what we would think of as the backbone. The pink bubble is our whole community. Do we have, we have a whole host of organizations and groups, which are the little white circles. And then ultimately, as we identify priorities, we may want to create different specific action teams to really help drive that work forward. So there's kind of the theory. Let's look at one example of what this actually looks like in action. And I love this. This is a poverty reduction effort in Erie, Pennsylvania. The then mayor discovered they had the highest rate of poverty anywhere in the state, did not want that on his watch, mobilized and started working with his county counterpart. They held rich conversations with a diversity of folks across the community to understand both what resources and concerns people had around the levels of poverty, how they would like to mobilize, and then what they thought needed to be focused on to move the community forward out of poverty. And when after about it, and they also looked outside their community, which is what other communities that were successfully tackling poverty were doing and what they might be able to adopt and learn from those. When they went public, I love this. They announced their initiative, Erie Together, in terms of what it wasn't, not what it was. So they start with not a social service agency, not a social service program, but a county-wide civic movement. So if in their consultations, which were quite broad, they were starting to build relationship, when they started to announce what they were trying to do, they're saying, you're all part of this. We can't do this alone. We've got to create this movement across the community to prevent and reduce poverty and elevate prosperity. They then went, so that's the aspiration, right, of the common agenda. The next piece is they identified three areas, three priority areas that they collectively were going to focus on as their contributions to advancing action around the aspiration. One was learning, right? Very clean. More children become successful adults. Working, that more of the local people had access to sustainable employment. And then thriving, recognizing some families in the community were really in dire straits. We need to stabilize and make sure everyone's basic needs are met first. When they got to the place where they're trying to operationalize it, the piece that they moved to next was this notion of sort of three working groups, four working groups to help advance, and each one would focus narrowly on one dimension. So one of these groups was the Early Childhood Readiness and Success, representing lots of different collaborative perspectives. And they all agreed on some of the key benchmarks that would signal that a young person was on track to thrive. But then they had to have a robust debate because you can't advance multiple strategies. They agreed they all had to choose one, but it was really difficult given their perspectives and the legitimacy of picking any one of these as potential pathways for progress. Ultimately, they chose third grade reading. Why was it important? Because it gave them a shared focus at a scale they could actually start to take action around. They started with baseline data, which shows you how important the data is in terms of what is the current state for third graders in Erie in terms of their reading level. And then once they had that, they started broadly communicating, raising awareness, and mobilizing a range of different strategies. So new capacity building and training for teachers across multiple schools, the mobilizing of faith communities to hold after school reading programs for kids, the library mobilizing all kinds of different players. Ultimately, within 3 years, this shows you the power of the data. They could measure and demonstrate to the community the collective progress that had been made, which was totally inspiring. Not only then freed up this group, because they've got the solutions now humming to take on one of the other priorities that they had identified in their early planning, but also really important, not only for those individual kids and their progress, but also for the community to recognize they had the capacity as a community to take on something tough, and by working together, they could change it. So I'm aware of time. I'm going to jump through this stuff really quickly. Common implementation stumbles. The biggest one is we keep falling into traps of thinking of ourselves as an organization, and we're not. We're a mechanism by which organizations can come together and understand the problem in a more holistic way and prioritize and innovate new experiments, prototypes for additional ways of thinking and acting. Really important to recognize it requires us to change how we've historically thought about some of these problems as well. One of which is we recognize that complexity and that it's going to be really hard, but we need everybody thinking and working together to help figure out the new solutions. Really recognizing that it's not like a lead organization who owns responsibility for this complex issue and is consulting other players. It's that we're putting the issue and opportunity in the center and inviting multiple stakeholders and actors to talk about what their contributions and benefits could be in addressing the issue itself. Really, this we've talked about the systems distinction, right? Programmatic interventions help the odds for certain people, but a systemic intervention changes the odds for everyone. And they really work synergistically for greater impact. And then I absolutely love this, right? If you're going to shift a system, you're finding allies like we are today, looking for pressure points, places where there might be more opportunity to experiment and try new things. We want to be very compassionate and positive. These changes are hard. And so we sow lots of seeds because we don't actually know what's going to stay rooted. And we never let go of the North Star, but we hold the strategy for how we're going to get there in a really flexible way. All right, so I've kind of run through this super duper quickly, and I'm already running a little bit late, I realize. Oop, I wonder, I want to wonder if what we can do is ask people, all of you, can you think when you, in the context of your own work, what do you see as maybe the biggest challenge to applying an approach like this in your work? I want you to type it into the chat. What is the biggest challenge you see? And then when I signal, I want everyone to hit send because I want us to see it all um, at the same time. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that. And I'm so mindful of time, John. I'm so sorry. Um, all right, ready? Okay, hit send if you're ready. The biggest challenge. Beautiful. Takes a long time. Trust between partners, getting everyone together. That leadership. Do we have the data? Like, how do we agree on our starting point? Getting leaders in the organization to support an approach with multi-sector involvement. Do we even know? Do they even know why we need to have all these different players involved? That's fantastic. Yep, the silos for sure. And that funding often follows those silos as opposed to really fostering collective work. I think you're right. Christine, your piece around polarization, not sure how many of you follow the Edelman Trust Barometer, but they publish something every year. And their most recent one is really interesting because it says we've actually moved beyond polarization to something that they're calling isolationism. So we only now want to work with people that we know and that think like us, even though we know that that's a huge concern because these issues are far bigger than any one group can tackle alone. Competition. Yep, for sure. What's in my purview, in this case, municipal versus provincial, like what can we do? And really understanding those influence points. Think forward. Same exercise. Thank you for this. What are some opportunities that you can see in terms of your own work if we were to embrace a collective impact approach? Same thing. Take a minute, type it in. And when you're ready, let's hit send and see what people come up with. Building really resilient communities. You're right. Part of this, one of the big indicators of success often is tracking how, because of the relationships that we're helping to create, can we actually create greater capacity in our community to solve problems, whatever they are. New energy. Mm. There is that mindset about not wanting to be rescued too, isn't there? Right? And recognizing we all have a piece of the puzzle, but the power comes when we can put them together. And that it doesn't happen quickly. I think that's the other piece, right? But people are attracted to the energy and the possibility for sure. And opportunity for greater understanding. Therefore, our solutions are more likely to kind of get some traction. Beautiful. I'm going to turn it back to you, John. I know this has been really quick. One of the commitments I'll make to you all is I will harvest this and put it into the mural that we were all adding your questions to, and turn it into a PDF that can be part of the archive for all of us, so we don't lose this thinking and we can keep coming back to it. But there you go.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you. And thanks everybody. I'm going to pass it to Laura to do our closing, but I just wanted to take a minute to say thank you, and we really look forward to seeing everybody at our next session and throughout the year. So I hope there's richness here that you're able to draw from. And over to you, Laura.
Great. Thank you, John. And thank you, Sylvia. I saw a few questions in the chat about if the slides will be shared. So yes, we want to confirm that the recording from the meeting today and the slides will all be put in the Google Drive folder. If you received an email from me yesterday, there should be a link to that. I will also put the link in the chat before we log off today. So we'll make sure that all relevant materials from the sessions, if there's any other things shared, that we'll keep them uploaded there and you can have access. We also have access to the poster. If there's people in your networks who would be interested in joining, you can feel free to share that more broadly. We also would love to hear kind of how this session has been impactful for you and what you're taking away from it. So I think John has made the poll live if you could respond there. So just some other final wrap-up notes. Our next meeting will be on May 26th, same time. And I believe if you registered kind of before beginning of day yesterday, you should have received a recurring calendar invite in your for all of the sessions through the 10 months that we'll be running this. If you haven't received that calendar invite, if it was just for today or it's not recurring, feel free to reach out to me or to John and we'll make sure that you get all those dates in your calendar. And a final piece of logistics is because a big part of this is building the networks and relationships between everyone in this space, we'd love to share a contact list out with everyone who's registered. So that will be shared through the shared file, and we'd include the name, organization you're affiliated with, and your email address to be shared with the group. If you would not like to be included on that contact list, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is on the screen, and I also sent you the link. If you would not like your name to be included there, and that is fine. I think those are the final logistics for today. Thank you all for taking the time to join us and participate, and we look forward to connecting again. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, everyone.
John.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.